Have you ever given everything to your family and still been left aside? This story is for you. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments when you felt the same way. My name is Ruth Adam. I am 55 years old, and if someone were to ask me who I am, I would answer without hesitation. I am a mother. Of course, there is more to me. I am a widow, a retired seamstress, a lover of old music and gardens filled with simple flowers. My hair is almost entirely gray now, and my hands, marked by years of work, carry the wrinkles and spots of someone who never spared herself in order to care for others. Still, when I look in the mirror, the first thing I see is not the passage of time. What I see is the memory of everything I gave to my family. My life was built on sacrifices, small and large, almost always invisible, and for a long time, I believed that was how it was meant to be. On that November afternoon, as I stirred a pot of cinnamon tea in my kitchen, I thought it would be just another Thanksgiving, like so many before. I would cook until my feet ached, prepare the turkey with the same seasoning my mother once used, spread across the table the embroidered cloths she left me as inheritance. Then, I would welcome my children and grandchildren, hear their laughter, see the family gathered, and feel that all my effort had been worth it. The smell of tea rising into the air carried me back over the last 30 years. I remembered the first celebrations, when Marcos and Clara, my children, were still young. Clara now lives far away, in another state, but Marcos, my youngest, had always been close. He was the one who ran through the kitchen begging to taste the turkey stuffing. The one who stole pieces of raw pumpkin pie dough and said, "Mouthful, Mom. When I grow up, I'll always want to eat your Thanksgiving dinner. Nobody cooks like you." Memories like that are sweet, but also cruel, because they remind us of what has been lost. The phone buzzed on the table, and I saw his name, Marcos, light up the screen. My heart warmed instantly. I already pictured the call, him confirming the time, asking me to bring that walnut stuffing, or reminding me of the pumpkin pie. I smiled before I even answered. "Hi, son. I was just thinking about the menu. You won't believe it. I already bought the walnuts. I wanted to make it just like last year. Remember how the kids loved his voice?" Cut me off. "Mom, listen, about Thanksgiving this year." He sounded hesitant. "Yes, what is it?" "It's just that you can't come this time." The silence that followed was so heavy that even the whistle of the kettle seemed far away. "What do you mean, Marcos?" My voice came out low, almost breathless. "Patricia's parents decided to host everything. They want a more sophisticated dinner. There'll be fine wine, appetizers. It's a different style. They thought it would be best to keep it just between us and their guests." For a moment, I couldn't understand if it was real or a nightmare. I stared at my own hands, the same hands that had washed, cut, sewn, served, and fed that family for so many years. And then I heard it. In the background, Patricia's clear, sharp voice. "Tell her she doesn't need to come. Those heavy, cheap dishes only ruin the dinner." The knife went in deep. The world seemed to spin slowly. Before me, I saw not only the steam rising from the kettle, but also fragments of the past. Myself counting coins at the market to buy the turkey. Myself sewing dresses late at night to pay for Marco's education. Myself smiling even when food was scarce, because I believed tradition and love sustained more than any luxury ever could. I swallowed hard. Marco's voice returned, anxious. "Mom, don't take it personally. It's just, they want to do it their way. We'll see each other on Sunday. Okay, just the two of us. Sunday. As if Thanksgiving were just any lunch, something you reschedule. Without weight, without memory, without heart." I breathed deeply. My voice came out serene, almost cold. "All right, son, I understand." I hung up. I set the phone down on the table and stared at the embroidered cloth, now stained with splashes of tea. It was as if that embroidery, my mother's inheritance, had just been dishonored. The clock on the wall struck 7, its hand echoing loudly. Each chime sounded like a cruel reminder. I had been left out. Me, the one who had built every memory, was now deemed dispensable. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. There, between the scent of cinnamon and the shadows of the kitchen, a decision began to take shape. I could bow to contempt. I could hide, accept exclusion as fate. But no, that night, something awoke within me. A flame that did not burn with hatred, but with clarity. And I knew, if they did not want my presence, they would receive something much greater, not just me, but the truth, and the truth. The truth never needs an invitation. That night, sleep abandoned me. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind beat against the windows, as if the world outside had more peace than I did. I closed my eyes and her voice came back. Those heavy, cheap dishes only ruin the dinner. Each time that sentence echoed inside me, it was as if an old scar split open again. When I finally rose, it was already past midnight. The kitchen was cold, silent, lit only by the weak glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtain. I turned on the light and sat down at the wooden table, the same table where I had served so many Thanksgiving dinners. But this time, instead of pots and dishes, I placed before me an old brown folder. It was heavy, almost alive. I opened it slowly, and there lay the pile of papers I had guarded for decades, many yellowed with age, others still smelling faintly of ink. To anyone else, they were nothing more than receipts, contracts, bank slips. To me, they were entire chapters of my life. I picked up the first one, dated 1998. It was the receipt for a new sewing machine. I remembered the Helena of that time, younger, but already a widow, with Marcos and Clara still small. I hadn't bought that machine for luxury, but because the old one had broken. I spent entire nights sewing school uniforms, party dresses for neighbors, curtains made to order. Every coin that came in, I put aside for the future of my children. The next page was from 2005. A loan contract, signed with trembling hands. That day, I put my own house up as collateral to pay for Marcos' college tuition. I remembered sitting in front of the bank manager, my heart racing, praying it would all work out. When I left the bank, Marcos was waiting at the door. He hugged me tightly and said, "Mom, I promise. One day I'll repay you for all of this." Those words still echoed now, but they rang hollow, as if spoken by someone who never truly existed. I kept leafing through the papers. There was the receipt for the down payment on his house, the very house where now I was unwanted. Part of that money had come from selling my husband's car, the last possession I had of him. I cried the day I handed over the keys, but Marcos cried with me, swearing that house would also be mine, that there would always be a place for me there. Then came the slips for the small monthly transfers, $200 here, $500 there, help for the electric bill, for the children's private school, for the kitchen renovation. I never gave the money in a way that would humiliate him. I always invented excuses. There was a little left over from my pension. The bank made a mistake and deposited too much. Take it, son. It will make me happy. I didn't want him to feel dependent. I only wanted to make sure he never lacked anything. As I separated the papers, I felt the weight of each one. They weren't just numbers, they were sleepless nights, jewelry sold, dreams postponed. They were dresses I never bought, trips I never took, doctors I never visited, all so that he could have more. My eyes burned. I wiped my face and realized I was crying. But these were not the same tears as before. They were not of pain, they were of indignation. In that cold kitchen, among scattered papers and heavy memories, something began to change inside me. I remembered an episode one had kept buried until now. Marcos was 12 years old and wanted to join a school soccer tournament. The official uniform was expensive, and I didn't have the money. That night, I sat at the sewing machine and accepted an impossible job to make 20 party dresses for a local shop in only 3 days. I spent nights without sleep. My fingers blistered, but I did it. He went to the tournament radiant, wearing his brand new uniform, never knowing what I had sacrificed for that smile to exist. And now, years later, I was being told my food was heavy and cheap. I looked again at the folder. It was no longer a burden. It was a silent witness. Each paper was a brick in the house where I was no longer welcome. Each number was an untold story, and every tear that fell upon them turned into strength. I organized everything in chronological order, placed them in separate envelopes, and lined them across the table. My heart pounded hard, but for the first time in days, I felt clarity. This was not about petty revenge. It was about respect, about gratitude, about refusing to let the truth be erased. I sealed the last envelope, ran my hand over it as if sealing a destiny, and whispered to myself, "They will remember. They will have to remember." The next morning was born gray. The sky seemed covered by a heavy sheet, with no cracks for light to pass through. And yet, when I opened the kitchen window, I felt something different in the air. It wasn't relief. There was still a knot in my chest, but it wasn't the same weight as the night before. It was a kind of clarity. I prepared the coffee in silence. The drip of the coffee maker filled the kitchen with a rhythmic beat. Each drop seemed to whisper, "Decide, decide, decide." That was when my eyes fell upon the oven. Old, marked by years of use, but faithful. How many stories had that oven already witnessed? How many dinners, how many loaves baked for selling, how many pies made to console? I smiled to myself. There, in front of me, was the answer: the pumpkin pie. There was no dessert more symbolic. I had learned the recipe as a teenager, from my mother, Donna Maria, a simple woman who made of her kitchen an altar. I remembered her mixing the dough with firm hands and saying, "Daughter, the secret of the pie is not in the pumpkin, nor in the sugar. It is in the heart of the one who prepares it. That is what gives it flavor." For decades, I repeated that phrase like a mantra, and every time I made the pie, it was as if my mother were with me, reminding me that cooking is an act of love. It was that very same pie that Marcos would choose over any birthday cake. "Mom, forget the chocolate cake, make the pumpkin one," he'd say, already drooling. It was that pie I carried wrapped in foil when he moved into his college dorm, so he would never forget the taste of home. And now, ironically, it was that same pie his wife despised as cheap food. But I knew the truth. That pie was more than food. It was memory. It was heritage. It was symbol. I opened the drawer and pulled out my mother's recipe book. Its pages were yellowed, stained with oil and melted sugar. I ran my fingers over her crooked notes, as if I were touching her hands again. I prepared the dough slowly, feeling its texture between my fingers. As I kneaded, flashes came to me. Clara and Marcos licking the spoon when they were small. My husband walking into the kitchen with a wide smile, saying the smell of the pie could heal any sadness. My younger grandchildren begging, "Just one more piece." Each memory was both a wound and a strength. When I placed the pumpkin in the oven, the sweet aroma began to fill the house. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. It was as if the weight of the night before was being transformed into something new. Not forgiveness, not yet, but courage. While the pie baked, I returned to the table and spread out the envelopes. I arranged them like a deck of truths, each one carrying a piece of everything I had done for my family. I looked at them and thought, if they try to deny my love, they will not be able to deny my papers. If they try to erase my story, they will have to tear apart evidence that cannot be destroyed. I picked up a pen and wrote names on each envelope: Patricia, her parents, even the invited neighbors. Not because I bore them malice, but because I wanted them all to witness. There would be no room for doubt. When the oven beeped, I took the pie out carefully. The crust was golden, the smell of spices filled every corner of the house. I placed it on the table, beside the envelopes. The contrast made me smile. On one side, love, on the other, proof. And then the final idea came to me. It wasn't just about entering that house uninvited. It was about putting the truth on the table, literally, in front of everyone. I took a clean cardboard box and lined it with a white cloth embroidered by my mother. I placed the pie inside, as if laying down a precious jewel. Then I tucked the envelopes into a discreet black bag. I looked at the two objects. One was the sweetness I had always offered, the heritage carried from generation to generation. The other was the memory of invisible sacrifices, transformed into a silent weapon. I touched the pie, still warm, and whispered, "You despise simplicity, but it will be simplicity that exposes the truth." A shiver ran through my body. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't shrinking. I was rising. That night, I would not be just the rejected mother. I would be the voice of memory, and no one would have the power to silence me again. Thanksgiving night arrived cold and cutting. The sky was clear, sprinkled with stars, but the wind carried a chill that pierced through my coat. I could have stayed home, hidden under blankets, pretending none of it mattered. But no. That night, every step I took was an answer to the contempt they had tried to impose on me. I drove slowly toward the neighborhood where Marcos lived. With each block, the houses grew larger, more illuminated, as if every light bulb were a trophy of status. On some porches, families were already toasting together, glasses raised, children running through the yards. It was as if the whole world was celebrating, except me. When I parked in front of his house, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. I took a deep breath. The black bag with the envelopes was on the passenger seat. Beside it, the box with the pie. The sweet smell still escaped through the lid, filling the car with memories. I looked at the facade of the house. It was fully lit through the glass windows. I could see an immaculate setting, smiles, laughter, silhouettes toasting with crystal glasses. It was like watching a play from which I had been cut. I closed my eyes for a moment. I heard Patricia's voice echo again in my head. Those heavy, cheap dishes only ruin the dinner. That was enough to make the fear vanish. I took the pie in my arms, grabbed the bag, and crossed the street with firm steps. The front door, as I already knew, was unlocked. Patricia always said that in this safe neighborhood there was nothing to worry about. How ironic. She feared so much that I would ruin her image, yet she didn't worry about locks. I pushed the door open slowly. The classical music came. First, soft violins filled the air, then the smell of roasts and sophisticated seasonings. I entered in silence, letting the door close behind me. The main room was a showroom, imported flowers in crystal vases, scented candles scattered in golden holders, paintings by modern artists hanging on the walls. Everything calculated to impress, but it was the dining table that stole my breath. A white linen cloth covered the long table. At the center, a perfectly roasted turkey looked as though it had come from a magazine. Around it, side dishes served in fine porcelain, colorful salads, exotic appetizers, gleaming sauces. The crystal glasses reflected the chandelier's light, like diamonds. Every detail screamed, "Look at us. We are special. We are different." I stood still for a few seconds, observing. And I couldn't avoid the comparison. I remembered my own Thanksgiving tables, cloths embroidered by my mother, simple ceramic plates, mismatched chairs borrowed from neighbors so everyone could fit. But on those tables, there was something absent here: soul. I walked to the doorway, leading into the dining hall. From where I stood, I could see the guests. 12 people, among them Patricia's parents, some of their friends, and of course, my son and my grandchildren. The children ran around the table, smiling. I saw the sparkle in their eyes, and my heart tightened. They had no idea their grandmother was being erased from her own story. The adults, however, were entertained. They laughed loudly, toasted, discussed wines and trips abroad. Patricia's father told a story about a stay in Paris. Her mother laughed elegantly, almost rehearsed, as if every gesture had been calculated to enchant the audience. I could have stepped back. I could have left in silence, convincing myself it wasn't worth it. But no, every one of their laughs was a reminder of the place they had chosen to deny me. I adjusted the pie in my arms, shifted the bag on my shoulder, and entered the room. The effect was immediate. Conversations ceased. The laughter was swallowed in the air. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, as if I were an intruder in a perfect scene. Marcos was the first to react. "Mom." His voice came out choked, between surprise and shame. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Patricia dropped her napkin onto her lap with a sharp gesture. The polished smile she had worn for the guests vanished in seconds. Her expression shifted into a mix of irritation and despair. "Helena, this is completely inappropriate. You weren't invited." The silence was so dense it felt as if even the classical music had lowered. I walked up to the table and placed the pie box right at the center, beside the gleaming turkey. The contrast was striking. On one side, ostentation. On the other, simplicity, loaded with memory. I looked around calmly, meeting the gaze of each guest. Some were embarrassed, others curious. "Good evening, everyone." My voice came out firm, clear, without a tremor. "I thought you might like to taste a real Thanksgiving dish. And perhaps a little truth." I opened the black bag. The zipper slid slowly, the sound echoing in the silent room. I pulled out the envelopes, one by one. The white paper gleamed under the chandelier's light. I walked around the table, handing each guest an envelope. The rustle of papers was the only sound besides my breathing. Patricia's father cleared his throat, trying to keep composure. "What is this? What kind of joke is this?" I looked him straight in the eye. "It's no joke. These are proofs, proof of every cent, every sacrifice, every piece of my life that was given to sustain this home." Patricia tried to stand, agitated. "Enough. This is ridiculous. Helena, you have no right to," but it was already too late. The first guests had begun opening their envelopes. Their eyes scanned the pages, brows furrowing, exchanging looks. One of them whispered, "These are official documents." I remained standing, serene, watching. The shock was only just beginning. The weight of silence in that room lingered as I turned to leave. The papers were still scattered across the immaculate table. The pumpkin pie rested untouched beside the golden turkey, and the guests' eyes remained fixed on me, but I no longer needed any answer. I walked down the hallway like someone crossing a tunnel far too long. With each step, the sound of my heels echoed against the wooden floor, and in that sound there was something different. It was no longer the echo of a humiliated woman, but of someone who had reclaimed her voice. I opened the front door. The cold night wind struck me like an embrace of freedom. I breathed deeply and felt, mixed with the chill, the distant aroma of other homes celebrating. Outside, laughter, music, and the smells of food escaped from the glowing windows. For a moment, I looked back. Through the main window, I saw Patricia gesturing, trying to patch up the damage with a false smile before the guests. I saw her parents with their heads lowered, embarrassed. And I saw Marcos, standing before the table, motionless, his eyes fixed on the pie. It was in that detail that my heart found calm. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at the pie, at the symbol of all that we had been. I smiled faintly, and for the first time in a long time, that smile came without pain. I stepped down the porch stairs, hugged the black bag against my chest, now empty, light, and got into the car. I started the engine. The radio was low, playing a soft song, almost like a whisper. As I drove down the wide streets of the neighborhood, Christmas lights twinkled on the neighboring houses, reminding me that the holiday season had already begun. Every lit window showed me families gathered, abundant tables, embraces, but unlike what I had imagined, I didn't feel envy. I felt relief. For the first time in years, I was no longer fighting to be accepted in a place that no longer belonged to me. I arrived home and found silence waiting for me, but it was a different silence, not empty, not lonely, but restful. I went to the kitchen, took from a cupboard a simple bottle of wine I had kept for some special occasion. I decided the occasion was now. I placed a glass on the table, filled it halfway, and raised it in the air. The reflection of the ruby liquid flickered under the dim light. "This is my Thanksgiving," I whispered, "and for the first time, it is truly mine." I drank slowly. The wine warmed my chest. I looked at the shelf and saw an old photograph. Me, young, holding baby Marcos in my arms. The Helena in that photo still believed that unconditional love would be enough to hold an entire family together. The Helena of today knew that without respect, love becomes a burden. I walked into the garden behind the house. The flowers were wilted from the cold, but I could still smell the earth. I closed my eyes and remembered my mother, Donna Maria, saying, "Daughter, true gratitude is not waiting for recognition. It is knowing, inside yourself, that you gave your best and can sleep in peace." That night, I understood. I did not need formal apologies, nor forgiveness. What I gained was greater liberation. I returned inside, sat at the table, and served myself a simple plate of mac and cheese, still warm from the pot I had cooked earlier. I ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a banquet. And when I finished, I raised the glass once more, alone but whole, to the women who gave everything, and still find the strength to rise again, to the mothers forgotten, but never defeated, to the grandmothers who are the root, even when their branches are cut, and to myself, because I finally learned to give thanks for myself. The flame of the candle on the table flickered, and I knew that night would not only be remembered for the scandal in a rich house, it would be remembered for me as the day I reclaimed my place in the world. The toast was made, and for the first time in many years, I was at peace. The weight of silence in that room lingered as I turned to leave. The papers were still scattered across the immaculate table. The pumpkin pie rested untouched beside the golden turkey, and the guests' eyes remained fixed on me, but I no longer needed any answer. I walked down the hallway like someone crossing a tunnel far too long. With each step, the sound of my heels echoed against the wooden floor, and in that sound there was something different. It was no longer the echo of a humiliated woman, but of someone who had reclaimed her voice. I opened the front door. The cold night wind struck me like an embrace of freedom. I breathed deeply and felt, mixed with the chill, the distant aroma of other homes celebrating. Outside, laughter, music, and the smells of food escaped from the glowing windows. For a moment, I looked back. Through the main window, I saw Patricia gesturing, trying to patch up the damage with a false smile before the guests. I saw her parents with their heads lowered, embarrassed. And I saw Marcos, standing before the table, motionless, his eyes, fixed on the pie dot. It was in that detail that my heart found calm. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at the pie, at the symbol of all that we had been. I smiled faintly, and for the first time in a long time, that smile came without pain. I stepped down the porch stairs, hugged the black bag against my chest, now empty, light, and got into the car. I started the engine. The radio was low, playing a soft song, almost like a whisper. As I drove down the wide streets of the neighborhood, Christmas lights twinkled on the neighboring houses, reminding me that the holiday season had already begun. Every lit window showed me families gathered, abundant tables, embraces, but unlike what I had imagined, I didn't feel envy. I felt relief. For the first time in years, I was no longer fighting to be accepted in a place that no longer belonged to me. I arrived home and found silence waiting for me, but it was a different silence, not empty, not lonely, but restful. I went to the kitchen, took from a cupboard a simple bottle of wine I had kept for some special occasion. I decided the occasion was now. I placed a glass on the table, filled it halfway, and raised it in the air. The reflection of the ruby liquid flickered under the dim light. "This is my Thanksgiving," I whispered, "and for the first time, it is truly mine." I drank slowly. The wine warmed my chest. I looked at the shelf and saw an old photograph. Me, young, holding baby Marcos in my arms. The Helena in that photo still believed that unconditional love would be enough to hold an entire family together. The Helena of today knew that without respect, love becomes a burden. I walked into the garden behind the house. The flowers were wilted from the cold, but I could still smell the earth. I closed my eyes and remembered my mother, Donna Maria, saying, "Daughter, true gratitude is not waiting for recognition. It is knowing, inside yourself, that you gave your best and can sleep in peace." That night, I understood. I did not need formal apologies, nor forgiveness. What I gained was greater liberation. I returned inside, sat at the table, and served myself a simple plate of mac and cheese, still warm from the pot I had cooked earlier. I ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a banquet. And when I finished, I raised the glass once more, alone but whole, to the women who gave everything, and still find the strength to rise again, to the mothers forgotten, but never defeated, to the grandmothers who are the root, even when their branches are cut, and to myself, because I finally learned to give thanks, for myself. The flame of the candle on the table flickered, and I knew that night would not only be remembered for the scandal in a rich house, it would be remembered, for me, as the day I reclaimed my place in the world. The toast was made, and for the first time in many years, I was at peace. The third day after the dinner seemed ordinary, but my heart knew something was about to happen. The silence in the house was no longer the same lonely silence. It was an attentive silence, one that listens to its own breathing. Then came the knock at the door, 3 short taps. The same pattern I would recognize anywhere. When I opened it, Marcos was there, his face worn, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept since that night. He carried nothing in his hands, and that struck me as symbolic. A man who always carried documents, folders, phones. Now he arrived with nothing but the weight of his own shame. "Mom," that was all he could say. I let him in. He sat at the table and stared at his hands. I said nothing. Life had taught me that sometimes it is in silence that truths finally surface. At last he drew a deep breath. "I will never forgive myself for what happened." I stayed quiet. "Mom, I saw, I heard, and yet I let them speak of you as if you were a burden. I betrayed you." That word betrayed cut through my chest like a knife, but I did not let him see it. "You don't need to torture yourself, Marcos. What happened wasn't a surprise to me. I already knew you had put me in second place, a long time ago. That dinner only made visible what I already felt." He raised his eyes, desperate. "But I don't want that. I don't want to lose you, Mom. Patricia doesn't understand. She doesn't see. But I do. I remember everything. I remember the nights you sewed until your hands ached. I remember Dad's car that you sold. I remember you crying in secret when I started college, afraid you wouldn't be able to pay. I remember, Mom, I remember everything." I closed my eyes, and in that instant, the memories came like waves. Me, 30 years old, sitting at the sewing machine, my fingers bleeding from pulling the thread. Me, in front of the bank, begging for more time. Me, selling my husband's car with tears on my face, and behind it all, his gaze, still a boy, believing the world was secure because I was there. I opened my eyes and breathed deeply. Then, if you remember, make it matter. Teach your children. They can still learn what gratitude truly is. Not through speeches, but through actions. He reached out, hesitant, and took my hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried an entire world. I want to change, Mom. I don't know how yet, but I want to. I squeezed his hand lightly and answered, begin with respect. Begin by not allowing the same ingratitude you once permitted. Begin by showing, in your own home, that love is not measured by the luxury of the table, but by the place you give to people. A silence, filled with tears, settled between us. There was no magical forgiveness, no complete reconciliation. But there was the seed of a new beginning. When he stood to leave, his eyes caught the kitchen counter. There was a new pumpkin pie, cooling. He smiled, timid, like a boy. Can I take a piece? I smiled back. Yes, but this time, don't hide it. Share it with your children, and tell them where the flavor comes from. The following afternoon, the gate creaked. I heard children's voices. I hurried to the window and saw Marcos returning, but this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him came my grandchildren, all three of them. Curious eyes, hurried steps, laughter, bubbling just beneath the surface. My heart raced. Mom said we could come visit Grandma, announced the youngest, holding a drawing in his hand. I opened the door with tears already in my eyes. They rushed in, filling my house with life, as if every forgotten corner lit up again. Soon they were seated around the table. The smell of the pumpkin pie I had baked that morning still lingered in the air. The eldest, serious like his father, pointed to the envelope I had left on the shelf. Grandma, Dad said you kept all the papers that prove what you did for him. Is that true? For a moment, I thought of denying it, but I realized this was the opportunity. Yes, they needed to hear it. It's true. I kept them because each paper told a part of our story. But you know something? I looked at them with a smile. Those papers aren't what matters most. What truly matters are the memories they represent. I took a slice of pie, cut it into 3 pieces, and handed them out. As they savored it, I began to tell the story. When your father was little, he loved this pie. Once, to buy the ingredients, I went without dinner for 3 nights in a row. But when he tasted it, his smile was worth more than any banquet. That's what this recipe carries. Love. The kind of love that gives, even when it hurts. The boys looked at me, wide-eyed. The youngest licked his fingers and said, so that's why it tastes different. It tastes like a hug. Marcos, sitting silently, ran his hand over his face. I knew that child's words struck him more deeply than any speech. I continued, life is like this, my dears. We are like trees. The roots are invisible, but without them, the tree cannot stand. I was your father's root, and now he must learn to be a root for you, because one day, you will also be roots for your own children. They nodded, as if storing away each word. Marcos, his voice breaking, added, and I promise you, never fail to honor the roots, because they are what holds everything up. That moment was worth more than all the toasts at the sophisticated dinner. It was simple, it was true, and it was eternal. When they left, I was alone again, but this time, there was no emptiness. My home was soaked in laughter, in scents, in renewed memories. I sat before the half-filled wineglass I had left from the night before. I raised it in the air and whispered, this is my legacy. To the women who were invisible roots, to the grandmothers who fed entire families with love and silence, to those who, one day, will have their truth recognized, and to myself, because I finally learned to give thanks, not for what I was given, but for the strength of all I gave. I drank the last sip, and I knew that, for the first time, I didn't need applause, because true recognition was already alive and now would be passed down from generation to generation. The night was already deep when I sat once more at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, but not the cold silence of days before. It was a welcoming silence, filled with warm echoes, the laughter of my grandchildren, Marcus's trembling voice, the sweet aroma of pumpkin pie still lingering in the air. In front of me, I placed a hardcover notebook, the one I usually use for grocery lists, recipes, scattered thoughts, but that night, I decided to use it for something different. I picked up my pen and wrote at the top of the page, Dear Mother. For a moment, I hesitated. It had been so many years since you left. And yet, It felt as if you were sitting right there with me, your hands rough and strong, always marked by work, always filled with love. I took a deep breath and continued. Today, on my Thanksgiving, I realized I learned far more from you than I ever thanked you for. I remember you teaching me the pumpkin pie recipe, telling me that the secret wasn't in the pumpkin or the sugar, but in the heart of the one who made it. And it's true, because it was with that heart that I built the lives of my children, even when I thought I had no strength left. It was with that heart that I sewed through endless nights, sold my husband's car, swallowed my tears so they would never have to swallow theirs. And even though ingratitude wounded me, it was that same heart that gave me the courage not to remain silent. The words flowed as if I wasn't writing them, but simply releasing what had always been trapped inside. Mother, today I understood what you meant when you said that gratitude is not waiting for recognition. It is planting roots and trusting that, sooner or later, they will bloom. My grandchildren proved that. They don't need papers or proof. They tasted the history in the pie. They heard it from me, and one day, they will tell it to their children. That is my legacy. A legacy that, in truth, is also yours. A tear fell onto the page, smudging the ink. But I didn't wipe it away. I let it dry there, sealing the letter. I closed my eyes and pictured you smiling, the way you used to when I was still a girl. A tired smile, but filled with pride. Thank you, Mother, because it was in your hands that I learned how to be a root. Today, I finally understand that it doesn't matter if I was excluded from one table. I have my own, and at my table, there will always be room for those who recognize the value of simple love, respect, and memory. I closed the notebook slowly, then I stood, walked to the window, and looked up at the sky. Among the stars, I searched for one point of light that could be your presence. And when I found it, I raised the glass of wine left from the night before. To you, Mother, to the women who came before me, to the roots that hold steady even when unseen, and to myself, because I have finally learned that gratitude also means being grateful for who I am. I drank the final sip, and in that moment, I knew there was no ending, only continuity. Because true gratitude does not die. It blossoms, generation after generation. Sometimes, the family we love the most can also be the one that hurts us the deepest. Have you ever gone through something like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, like the video and subscribe to follow the next ones.